Welcome to today's GNCC Espresso webinar, focused on one of the key problems facing employees and employers, and that is around talent attraction and retention. Economists have labeled it the war for talent. Some of us believe that maybe this is only a short-term challenge, but most experts indicate that this is something that employers have to deal with probably for the upcoming 10 years. Staff turnover is hard on an organization. It's challenging for a team and team members, but it's also very costly at the same time. Hence, employers are looking for solutions, and one such solution is a 4-day work week. Once considered little more than a thought experiment, the condensed schedule is quietly gaining momentum, and some people are indicating that a 4-day work week is inevitable in Canada. We are fortunate to be joined today by some of the experts who actually will give us a little bit of an insight and maybe take away some of the myth that is all around a 4-day work week. But for us to have a dialogue as such, we actually need partners by our side. And I'm really pleased to have the Niagara Economic Development powering today's webinar. The vision for the 10-year plan is Niagara is where innovative businesses grow and community-minded individuals come together to build a more prosperous future. And I think this is why there's such a good alignment today, because for businesses are looking for innovative ways to move forward. And we're really pleased to have with us the Director of Economic Development for the Niagara region, George Spetzer. George, over to you.
Well, good morning, Mishka, and good morning to everyone. It's always a pleasure to join you. And Niagara Region's Economic Development team is pleased to sponsor this edition of Espresso Live. We have learned that anything is possible, and we need to make transformational changes to our way of working. The Niagara region itself is undergoing significant change, with sectors such as aerospace, electric vehicles, and marine identified in our 10-year economic development strategy. In addition to these emerging sectors, Niagara's workforce is also seeing transformative change. Currently, Niagara has its lowest unemployment rate on record at 4.3%. The participation rate is also trending in the right direction, rebounding from 61% from a pandemic low of 53%. So over the past year, Niagara's labor force grew by 3,700 people, and jobs grew by 12,200 jobs in the region, and most of these positions were full-time. It is clear that competition for labor and talent is growing, and at a time where we are experiencing a labor shortage, and employers must consider new ways to attract job seekers. Together, these trends demonstrate that transforming how, where, and when we work is essential. So on behalf of Niagara Economic Development, it is our pleasure to sponsor the discussion today regarding radical change in the workplace. And I want to thank the GNCC, our guest speakers, and all participants for being part of this important conversation. Thank you.
George, thank you so very much. And thank you for all that you do for businesses across Niagara. It makes a difference. And when we talk about our guests and our experts that we have, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Hayley McDonald, who serves as Imagine Canada's Director of Experience and Change, where she works at the intersection of people, process, and data tech to make the work of her organization more inclusive, engaging, and impactful for its staff and stakeholders alike. Over the past 15 years, Hayley has led and supported cross-functional teams responsible for delivering several of Imagine Canada's core services. Hayley has also helped her organization establish and evolve their unique staff-led approach to talent and culture development. In her free time, you'll find Hayley working towards a MicroMasters in Digital Transformation Leadership, pouring through her latest library book haul, or on a family adventure along the Scarborough Bluffs. Hayley, it's so nice to have you with us. And Hayley is joined by Tim Richardson, who is a nonprofit professional with over 10 years of experience in leadership and governance roles in the sector. Formerly the executive director of grassroots youth-focused charity Project Canoe, Tim now manages Imagine Canada's standard programs, an accreditation body that strengthens practices in the area of governance, financial accountability and transparency, staff management, and volunteer involvement. Tim is experienced in strategic planning, staff management, organizational development, and best governance practices. He is kept busy by his 2 young children and sits on the board of the Greenpeace Canada Education Fund. To both of you, thank you so very much for being with us. And to all our guests, my thanks go out to you for joining us as well. Today's format is going to be an interactive one. We're going to start out with a presentation, probably around 35 to 40 minutes. And then after that, we're following up with questions. As you know, the chat function is open to you. If you have any questions during the presentation or following the presentation, please utilize the chat function likely at the bottom of your screen. And we will get, and I'm committed to getting to all the questions. Some of you have already provided questions to us in advance of this webinar, and please note that we have them here and we hope to address them as well. If you wish to enable live transcript, please refer to the button on your Zoom screen for that option. And lastly, as you know, this session today is recorded, and I also wanted to let you know that the presentation is being made available to you as well. On that note, Haley, I am going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mishka. It's such a pleasure to meet you, to meet your team, and a big hello to the members of the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, both those that are attending today and those that will be watching us on demand. We feel so fortunate to have been invited to talk about a topic that we are very passionate about at Imagine Canada. We've been part of, we're part of an experiment that we've worked really hard to structure and really been leaning into, and we've learned a lot along the way, and we're excited to share that with other folks who are also sort of treading into this area, as George said, of radical transformation to work, which is a really exciting time to be part of. So with that, let's go to the next slide. And I think, Tim, we can skip the introductions because Mishka did such a great job of introducing all of us. So thank you for that, Mishka. What I'd like to tell you a bit about is Imagine Canada. Who are we? What do we do? We're very much like, in many ways, the chamber, in that we work on behalf of the charitable, well, in our case, the charitable and nonprofit sector. We believe that strong, vibrant communities are fueled by a strong nonprofit infrastructure. And so we offer a number of programs and services that are designed to help charities and nonprofits meet their mission, respond to change, and do the incredible work that they're doing both here in Canada and abroad. We offer a number of programs and services that I'd love to tell you just a little bit about. The first is our standards accreditation program, and this is a program, as was noted, that Tim leads at Imagine Canada, and it offers accreditation to charities and nonprofits for demonstrating excellence against what I believe are 78 standards of operational excellence. It's an incredible program. We also offer a service called Grant Connect, which is Canada's most comprehensive fundraising research platform for charities and nonprofits. We offer a certification program for corporate community investment professionals and their companies for demonstrating investment of at least 1% of pre-tax profit into their communities. And our newest service is called HR Intervals, which is a free knowledge base of practical HR resources that we've designed specifically for small, medium nonprofits without dedicated HR resources. We also carry out public policy and advocacy work at the federal level, and we research all aspects of the charitable nonprofit sector so that leaders and decision makers can bring, evidence into their day-to-day decision making. Finally, if that wasn't enough, we also offer a membership program where we serve and engage a growing and diversifying base of nonprofit professionals that are dedicated to the work of strengthening the nonprofit sector. So that's a little bit about us. We really enjoy our work. There's never a dull day, as you can likely imagine, on a staff of about 30 to 35 folks working remotely full-time from across Canada. And with that, I will hand it over to Tim.
Thanks, Haley. So just starting off from the very top, what is the 4-day work week? One of the first questions I get from people when I tell that we are Imagine Canada is instituting a 4-day work week is, what does that mean exactly? What's the implications on pay? What hours? Is it 10 hours, 4 days a week? And there are many different versions of this. The version that is gaining popular support and popular buy-in it's called the 100-80-100 model, which is 100% of the pay from prior to the 4-day work week period for 80% of the time worked. So net one less day of your work week in exchange for 100% of the results. So this one is kind of like the pulling the rabbit out of the hat. One question is, how do you lose 20% of your time, your staff capacity, while maintaining 100% of the results? If we compare it to, say, a factory that produces 1,000 widgets an hour, you turn that factory off an extra 8 hours a week, it's going to produce 8,000 less widgets. So where's the how does that occur? So two ways in particular that we think about. One is through automation, of course. So actually reducing the required workload to do things can reduce the amount of time required to produce the same amount of things. And the other is through kind of understanding of how work in the modern world tends to occur, which is, especially in the knowledge work fields, but in all fields to varying degrees, is through the energy, the focus, the creativity of staff has a massive effect on the quality of work produced and the speed of the work undertaken. So the theory being kind of a well-rested staff team is a more effective staff team, and they make better decisions. They pursue higher value projects, and they produce higher quality work. And that's how you square that circle. And the data has borne that out. I will be getting to more data around that, but we have some positive data that's come out in recent months about this. So there are many approaches to achieving a reduced hour work week. The one that maybe immediately comes to mind is a sort of fifth day stoppage. So just simply, we're not open on Fridays anymore. We work Monday to Thursday as a whole organization. And you might use this one when collaboration is more important than coverage, when, say, a team needs to work together a whole bunch, and their sort of crossover as a team is really important. An alternative might be staggered, where it's everyone works 4 days a week, but service continues all 5 days or more in organizations and companies that have 7 days a week service or 6 days a week. So that could be based on a different department. So different departments could have different work weeks, and different individuals could have different work weeks. There's sort of decentralized, sort of relatedly decentralized model, which also focuses on the kind of departments and focuses on the contrast between different functions of the organization and when and where they're needed. And then annualized, which is sort of working back from an average of a 32-hour work week for each employee. At the end of a year, reviewing the amount of time an employee worked. Maybe there's an extremely busy period. Maybe there's a month where it's a regular 5-day work week, which is balanced out by a month where it's a much shorter work week, and so on. So that's a sort of the customizability you might see employed in some 4-day work week models. And then the 5-hour workday, I could go on. You can imagine all the different ways that you could split up the time here. So for us, for Imagine Canada, as a small sort of highly collaborative organization, we started with a 4-day work week with a fixed Friday off for all staff model. And that was sort of an important kind of discussion point for staff, because on some level, we recognize that that flexibility is really important. People like to choose when they have time, but also the kind of psychological toll of kind of this more distributed, decentralized approach. One of the kind of reasons a weekend is replenishing and restorative is because you aren't getting a bunch of work-related emails on those days, chances are. And so we wanted to kind of replicate that kind of the impact of a restful day off that you have on a Saturday or Sunday on the Friday. And we were able to do that because we have, we had some flexibility there, but we chose to be kind of more focused on that Friday, that shared Friday off. Although there are some exceptions to that, which we'll get to. Okay, and then just regarding the history of this, so of course, the work week has always been in flux. Business leaders, employees, labor organizers have been renegotiating the duration and shape of the standard work week since the start of the Industrial Revolution. during and prior, most people work 12 to 16 hours per day, 6 days a week. You know, a big change in that regard was the Ford Motor Company instituted the 8-hour 5-day work week in 1914. And the 40-hour work week itself wasn't standard across Canada until the 1960s. In the 1970s, there was a surge of interest in the 4-day work week, although this seems to have died away at that time and has been kind of resurrected as pandemic has brought sort of decent work and staff morale and retention back into focus. I see some questions coming into the chat, and I think the plan is to come to those at the end of the presentation. I think just based on skimming them that we are going to answer some of those pretty soon. Okay, so factors that led to our pilot as an organization. You know, we advocate for charities and nonprofits across Canada, and we talk about decent work, and other advocacy groups also talk about decent work standards for the sector. We had a desire to model decent work practices, both for our own interests of retaining employees and having, you know, high employee satisfaction and well-being, but also to sort of take on a leadership role of kind of showing that we practice what we preach in that regard. There is a normalization of overwork in purpose-driven industries. Of course, there's a normalization of overwork in many industries, but in the nonprofit and charitable sector, where people really believe in a specific mission, there is a tendency towards being driven by passion and a sense of guilt when you're not working on the mission in some way. So that has led to this kind of burnout. A culture in some organizations and some subsectors of burnout, and we want to kind of combat that normalization. Just in our experience, the staff burnout due to the pandemic, being home with kids, being home with young kids, school closures, just seeing that week to week, month to month, team check-ins, team meetings, one-to-ones, just knowing how deeply affected people were by the pandemic and continue to be in some ways. What made us want to address that, addressing inequities around invisible labor, intergenerational caregiving responsibilities. Really, we saw this as the focus of other organizations that kind of proposed and have pursued the 4-day work week is the distribution of labor in households is often skewed towards mothers, and in the case of intergenerational caregiving, towards groups, newcomer groups who may have greater responsibilities towards grandparents and younger children, grandchildren, and this work is not accounted for, and often it leads to a huge amount of inequity in terms of what are you doing outside of your work week? Are you immediately, as a parent of 2 young kids, like I can definitely identify with the fact that the moment I stop work, I'm starting a different kind of work. And of course, there's very many ways in which there are inequities in all sorts of ways with other demographics. And then talent attraction and retention in a hyper-competitive labor market. The nonprofit and charitable sector does lose talent to other sectors quite frequently, the private sector, even the public sector. We are looking for alternative ways to attract and retain that talent. And we will speak a little bit to that in upcoming slides, because we've already seen a really good impact in terms of the hiring pools that we've been able to attract. So I'm going to go a little bit into the benefits, and I will just I'll preface this by saying we're also going to go into some drawbacks and issues, because we are ourselves testing the 4-day work week. Our role isn't to advocate it specifically. I think Haley and I are both excited about it and want it to work, but we are evaluating it, as I'm sure many people in this room are, and thinking about this. But I'll start with the benefits. So some of you may have seen in the news, there've been quite a few recent news stories about this. 4-day Work Week Global is an organization that's working on this, on pilot projects across the world, and especially in the UK. And the University of Cambridge recently worked on a study with them, working with academics from Boston College in the US and a think tank called Autonomy, that has conducted this huge study of UK organizations that have undertaken the 4-day work week. Just give you sort of a high level view of those results. They've showed a 39% reduction in employee stress, a 71% reduction in burnout, 60% of employees found an increased ability to combine paid work with care responsibilities. 62% reported it easier to combine work with social life. Company revenue remained largely the same over the trial period, rising by 1.4% on average. Employee turnover decreased by 57%. 15% employees said no amount of money would induce them to work 5-day work week again. 92% plan to continue. 92% of organizations that undertook the pilot plan to continue the 4-day work week at the end of the trial. So those I think those are quite telling and powerful stats. So I've split the kind of benefits into two categories here, for employees and for organizations. So just that sense of well-being I've already spoken about, that sense of work-life harmony, that sense that you aren't rushing around on the weekend to get everything done, and that feeling of creativity, focus, and effectiveness. That's an employee benefit. Of course, it's a benefit to the organization as well. But that feeling of being on top of your work, of contributing, giving your best contribution at work, is really a positive to the 4-day work week. For organizations, we have recruitment and retention. So we, as I mentioned before, we've already seen people citing the 4-day work week as a reason to apply to work in Imagine Canada, and a reason that it would be much harder to move to a different position, a different employer from current employees. The productivity, of course, like the higher level of output, the higher quality of output, reduced absenteeism. I believe we had a stat about absenteeism. Maybe Haley can refresh us on that later, but there was I think a huge reduction in sick days that I forget the number for, but we'll get that for you. Equity, diversity, inclusion. So what I've alluded to earlier around invisible labor, the division of labor, and kind of giving people that extra margin in their lives to get things done that otherwise would just be more of their evenings and weekends. Sustainability. So this one is especially true in organizations that aren't remote working primarily, that have that commute. This I think was more of a touted benefit when remote work wasn't quite so normalized. But however many less, if you imagine 4-day work week, one less work day a week, all those reduced car rides, trips across the city, and everything like that. And then innovation. So this is just the fact that it's an innovation that businesses may consider. It's still in the early adopter phase, of course, and it's sort of progressive, and it helps you kind of potentially stand out a sort of a busy marketplace. A concrete commitment to decent work. So with that said, I will hand over to Haley, who's going to talk a little bit more about the flip side of this.
Thanks so much, Tim. And I'm just updating my slide over here to get there. There we go. So yes, we wanted to make sure that we balanced our presentation of the 4-day work week, because it's absolutely not a panacea. There are challenges that it creates to the organization, challenges it creates to those of you that want to bring this into the organization. And we also recognize that it introduces new challenges to pre-existing issues that already exist within our workforce that we want to speak to and not ignore. And I'm already seeing some of those reflected in the questions that are coming through right now. So one of the first challenges is that it does require investment, I believe, and we believe, to be successful in the 4-day work week. We feel that this is investment well spent. The investment we're thinking of here is in preparing your employees. Designing a pilot that is actually going to work for your organization will take time. It will take consultation, ideally. It also requires training your staff and coaching them. There's going to be a lot of behavior change required here at the individual, team, and organizational level, and that's going to take a bit of time and effort to make those changes. And of course, as Tim mentioned earlier, in many organizations, investing in your operations will be a critical success factor for both you and your customers and employee or stakeholders. And finally, there's investment in changing your HR policies, which at least for us, they sit for a long time without being updated, because it does require effort to update policies and all the rest. Now, everything said, this kind of investment is going to vary by organization, depending on your culture, where you might be more okay with just sort of, diving in and figuring things out as you go. The state of your operational sort of maturity, digital transformation, the nature of your business and relationships with your clients as well. But what we we've found as an organization that has, both very traditional sort of office work, but also direct service delivery to charities and nonprofit professionals, is that these investment challenges were long overdue. They've prompted us to really prioritize work that has been needed for a very long time. And sometimes you need that burning platform to make these kinds of changes happen. And the 4-day workweek, I think, provides an interesting opportunity for that. Number 2 is around mental models. There's 3 that I'll speak to today, and they're all somewhat related. And as we all know, mental models are really difficult to shift. And these are ones that we particularly found ourselves challenged by, both as a team that brought the 4-day work week to the organization, but then also, coached and supported our colleagues in sort of making the transition as well. The first one is around the norm of the 5-day work week and the composition that goes along with it. What I mean by this is, I'm assuming that just about everyone on this call, unless you were alive prior to the Ford Motor Company's introduction of the 8-day or the 8-hour 5-day work week, this is the way that work has always looked for us, and for many of us, imagining a shorter work week, especially with the same amount of pay, is quite a paradigm shift to wrap one's head around. And even for some, especially, I'm assuming, business owners and many of the hard workers at organizations, identity is tied in too with the time that you do at work and all the rest. So one of the ways that we've I wouldn't say countered this, but really sort of challenged it, is by recognizing that the 5-day work week in and of itself is a social construct, as Tim spoke to. This is something, the nature of the work week is something that we've been constantly playing with and adapting, and in many ways reflects, the context of one's time. And, being in the year 2023, I think there are conditions in place now that are pointing to a real need to reimagine how work is happening at organizations, and doing so without a reduction in pay is really important, knowing that the vast majority of folks, are just making ends meet. So that's mental model number 1, which I personally found to be the first challenge to sort of work myself through. Number 2 is this idea that the best measure of an employee's value contribution to an organization is through the number of hours that they work versus the results that they produce. Going back to Tim's example of factory work, you can see that connection, that one-to-one connection between hours worked and COGS produced or what have you. But in the modern work world, where we have knowledge work, but also the incoming changes brought on by digital transformation, number of hours worked really isn't directly proportional anymore, it seems, to the value that one can ultimately create. And if anything, it's counter. It can run counter to it. The more hours that we work can actually diminish the results that we produce. Another element of that is longstanding research on the social phenomenon of what we call the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, which tells us that the vast majority of outcomes or outputs, if you will, are caused by a minimum of the actual inputs. 20% of the inputs produce 80% of the value, and that is very much true. And I think the 4-day work week challenges us to actually see that through within our own organization. The last mental model, and I was even just chatting with someone yesterday about this, is this idea that our employees are already telling us that they're very stressed and overwhelmed with work. How does reducing the amount of time at work, the number of work days, actually help that? And I love that. I think it's spot on, right? And the answer that we found to that, and what you'll see through a lot of the writing and research these days, is that, again, in modern work, the overwhelm comes from being sort of on this constant hamster wheel of producing more and doing more and all the rest, and that that's at the cost of our, physical, mental, social, emotional well-being, and that in turn makes the overwhelm worse, right? So we have this sort of positive feedback loop, but in the wrong direction. And what the 4-day work week challenges us to do is to actually, intervene in that cycle and introduce a change that really disrupts it, and introduces also the benefits of rest, of relaxation, of work-life harmony that actually allows you to bring a better version of yourself to work. So you're actually making better choices around where you invest your energy, how you respond to stress, and all the rest. So those are three mental models that we absolutely encountered within ourselves and as an organization, and now we're also hearing it from folks who reach out to us to learn more about our experience with the 4-day workweek pilot. The next one, which is a bit of an odd one, I remember writing it and thinking, like, will people get this? I have heard from folks that they don't want the 4-day work week. And so I think that's something we need to acknowledge, that as wild as it seems, not everyone wants to work less. One recent example was a more junior staff person coming to me saying, I'm worried that less time at work is going to impair my ability to gain the experience and the knowledge that I need to grow within my career. And so I think this is where checking in with your employees first and critically throughout the process of designing and then running your 4-day work week pilot is really important, because different people will have different responses to the 4-day work week, and it's really important that we that we hear that and do our best to address it. The next two challenges are related to things that we can see the 4-day work week actually creating in terms of problems. One is, and I heard this actually yesterday again in chatting with someone, which is that there's a risk that the 4-day work week can be used in lieu of ensuring decent and competitive pay for our employees. For me, this one is nested in comments like, oh, the 4-day work week means that, everyone is basically getting an automatic pay raise. And so nested within that is, for me, and we chatted this one through yesterday a little bit, which is that, we don't therefore need to, update our compensation model, for a couple of years, because we've just given everyone, an automatic, sort of injection of money. And I think it's probably plain for most people to see, like, that's not the case. And if anything, that runs counter and will neutralize, if not, eliminate the benefits that you might hope to see from a 4-day work week. It pits employee wellness and effectiveness against their economic well-being, and those two things should not be at odds with each other. If anything, that's the reason why we're even looking at the 4-day work week. So that's one challenge that we do foresee, and we hope employers and employees can navigate that. The last one is and again, I'm seeing this come through in the questions, is how, what inequities might we see in the ability to adopt a 4-day work week beyond what are already, traditionally quite privileged industries, the knowledge work industries. And this is a very real challenge, and neither Tim or I will purport to have all the answers to that. But we do believe that, it's early days, and that we've seen evidence of organizations that are trying to make this work, even in, a 24/7, 365 sort of a delivery model, if you will, say, a shelter or, a restaurant or what have you. And I think some of the examples that Tim gave in terms of approaches, can be explored as an employer with your employees as to how to help them. Really, the main goal here is about giving them greater amounts of rest in order to bring their best selves back to work. And I think there's creative ways to get that done. And if it's not possible, and it's truly possible that not all industries or workplaces can make this work, what we hope is that, employers are nevertheless having a conversation around improving workplace conditions for their staff, finding other ways to bring in flexibility, mechanisms to improve well-being, and all the rest. So I think when you see it that way, the 4-day work week may not fit for you, but if it stimulates a conversation around how to make work better for everyone, I think that's a really great element of what you might call the 4-day work week movement. Thank you, Tim. You are a step ahead. So the next thing that we'd like to tell you a little bit about is what did this look like for us? It didn't happen overnight, and it was actually quite fun for Tim and I to reflect on, how this journey unfolded. And so I want to start the story with early in 2021. I believe this is when the pandemic was just sort of kicking up, and I credit Tim. Tim actually brought to me or engaged me in my first conversation about the 40 work week at work, and what we found was that it seemed to be just a little bit too much too soon. Personally, I'll admit I loved the idea. I wanted the idea, but I needed time to sort of work my head around it. It almost felt a bit radical, and so we didn't go much further, from those early conversations in early 2021. However, what I did notice throughout that year was, more injections of the 40 work week into everyday conversation. For example, seeing the 40 work week put forward as an area that staff wanted us to explore through our employee pulse surveys. As well as I remember being on vacation and someone messaging me saying, "Oh my goodness, can you believe it? That the 40 work week is an agenda item on our management team meeting." And I thought to myself, wow, this is interesting. Maybe things are changing here. February 2022, so about a year later, is when our leadership council, which is a cross-functional, multi-strata group that is charged with all of our people experience related work. This is when they formally took on the 40 work week project, began developing a set of recommendations for other groups to consider. And not long after, we struck a cross-departmental working group in order to really accelerate the preparations organization-wide. By November, this is when we had the pilot start date approved. It was a bit of a process for us. Our senior leadership had a number of conditions that they wanted to see met, including, seeing staff really lean into the preparations for 40 work week, ensuring that we had a good game plan for monitoring, how the pilot was unfolding over time, as well as evaluating its effectiveness, as well as early signs and signals that this would be received positively from our stakeholders. Following from that November decision, that's when we got going on just spreading the good news. People were sharing the news with their stakeholders. We were answering their questions. We were preparing our systems. We did quite a bit of investment in automating some of our workflows and through process design and what have you. And then it brought us to the beginning of this year, January. We kicked off our pilot, and we're now 2 months into the pilot, and we'll speak a little bit later to how that's going, but end to end, it's been about 2 years in order to reach this point, and it's been a really incredible experience so far. Come June, this is when we expect to be able to make a decision about whether or not to make the 40 work week permanent or extend the pilot, which is often a common practice, or perhaps try something different. So yes, that's our 40 work week journey. And I think with that, I'll hand it back to Tim.
Thanks, Haley. So I'll just go into some principles of I'm going to talk a bit more about designing the 4-day work week, and this will answer some of the more specific questions people have put in the chat. But starting with principles, so we wanted things to be simple. We didn't want to overcomplicate the schedule. You should be able to understand and predict pretty easily what's going to happen next week and 2 weeks from now without looking at a complicated schedule. We wanted a really staff-led consultative approach. We wanted decisions to come from the bottom up, and we wanted that discussion to be ongoing, so people didn't feel as if they were being given something they didn't want. The valuing impacts over outputs. I think we've spoken to that quite a bit already. Iteration over perfection. We didn't expect to start the 4-day work week. As Haley said, it's not a panacea. We didn't expect it to work totally right away. And the beauty of a pilot project is we haven't committed to staff or to future future hires that we are going to continue this, and that the shape of this decent work approach may change over time. And we accept that we'll likely have to make adjustments. and then a focus on equity and understanding the different needs of different staff and different departments and the different kinds of work they undertake. So with that said, I'll go a little bit more into specifics. So here's the kind of factors, I guess the little switches and levers you can pull in designing the pilot. So the pilot start date and duration, how long, when, are we ready right now? A big discussion for us was, we could do it in a quiet period, but does that really test whether the 4-day work week works? So we decided to do it a kind of a longer period, 6 months, which would get kind of the summer, summers being a little bit quieter overall for us. But getting the full spectrum of, the start of a year, the busyness of that, and then going into a summer and then seeing how the pilot holds up in that duration. In terms of length, we felt like we're almost 2 months into this pilot. I think if we'd done a 2-month pilot, I don't think it would have been a really good evaluation of it, because there is so much, speaking to Haley's mental model shifts, there's so much shifting. I even feel that the penny hasn't quite dropped that we're doing a 4-day work week yet. So 6 months felt like a good amount of time for us, but of course there's many factors that affect everybody there. Impacts on hours and compensation. How will this affect salaries? How does it affect vacation time, part-time staff, overtime? These are all questions that need to be answered, and policies need to be developed around these and communicated to staff, of course. There was a specific question about part-time staff. For us, we prorated up the compensation too. So we had a few staff that were already working 4-day weeks and being paid 4-day work weeks. Their pay was increased to be a 5-day equivalent. Regarding the other question around the long weekends, that was a kind of a decision made by the CEO. The question is, do you have 3-day work weeks in those cases? And we decided for the pilot period, at least, no, we would work on Fridays when there is a long weekend. And there is, there's a trade-off there, in that it's part of the beauty of having a day off consistently is that you can begin to build rituals and habits and even like classes and things around that. And it does, create a bit of a hesitate, like this week we are working on Friday because Monday was a day off. So, but of course, a 3-day work week feels extremely short. So it's an interesting trade-off, and one we'll be assessing as we go forward. Choosing the day, is it all Mondays for everyone? Is it all Fridays for everyone? Is it flexible? I've seen Wednesdays. That's a big question for us. We chose Fridays. Monitoring or evaluation, which Haley will speak to soon. How do we know it's working? How do we know if it was a success or not? What are the metrics we're tracking? What about exceptions, long weekends? I've spoken to personal schedules. Like I really, I just need to work on Fridays. Like, this would work way better for me. Like, do you make exceptions, and under what conditions, and how is it fair? And then the working groups, just a continuous body. We had a cross-departmental, cross-hierarchy group of, an empowered group that could make decisions and move the whole pilot project forward, including writing the outline, getting the feedback about that outline, refining the outline, and then creating policies around that. So those are some of the sort of different factors at play. Okay, I will turn to Haley now to talk a bit about monitoring and evaluation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to focus in on a few points because I know we're trying to get to questions from everyone here. So monitoring evaluation, incredibly important aspect of running an experiment like the 4-day work week pilot. A couple of points that I think were really critical to our success. One was investing in an evaluation partner. We joined 4-day week Global's North American pilot program. And through that, and for us, I think it was about $5,000, we have access to their academic-led team of researchers that will be conducting the evaluation of our pilot. Secondly, for the monitoring, there was some talk early on that we needed to create something net new, and yet we realized luckily in time that we had, I think, all of the necessary mechanisms in place for monitoring and holding ourselves accountable to our intended impact, our operating plan, our budget, our performance management system, our employee pulse surveys, these kinds of things. And I think the one thing that we needed to watch was the desire to over evaluate. I think it's a natural reaction to things that feel new and different. It's to constantly check in and bring the data forward and all the rest. And what we recognize is that the pilot is going to take time to sort of bear itself out. And so we needed to trust in that process and give it time, especially, early on where things are, more difficult. It has gotten more challenging, but we know that, we're early in the process and, are trusting in that. So we'll go over to the next one, Tim, if that's okay. All right. So quickly, just about preparing the team. This was a massive amount of work, and this was basically what our fall and December were focused on. On the staff and team side, we immediately challenged them to reduce the number or duration of their meetings. We provided training for them on time management, on communication norms, as well as essentialism. And we also set them up with individual and team reflections to really challenge them to clarify what their role is there to do, how their work will need to change and can change, quite frankly, in order to work within the bounds of a 4-day work week. On the organizational side, we adopted a 1.5-day meeting free time. This was to sort of preempt and force, the movement of meetings away from Fridays and all the rest, which was great. We developed our operating plan and budget to align with the 4-day work week. And we began investments in process improvements and automations. And finally, we really challenged our leaders to role model changes starting in the fall, reducing meetings, checking in a lot more regularly and focusing team's understanding of priorities and all the rest. I think this was all really well done. It's certainly more preparation than other organizations might do, but for us, I think it was really important. I don't regret any bit of it. Okay, the final slide for us is telling you a little bit about communicating the change. And this is an important stage. So once we had our go decision for the pilot, we needed to let a number of stakeholders know. And, a couple of learnings for us. One was, the personal touch really matters. This is a change for everyone. And I think our stakeholders all appreciated, sort of being told personally and really framing it in a way of, we're here for you and this shouldn't change anything for you. And that was an important part of our key messaging was we wanted to not be apologetic about putting our staff's our staff's well-being first, but we also wanted to reassure our stakeholders that this should have a net positive, if not net neutral, effect on their experience of Imagine Canada and the value that they need to derive from us. And so far, the responses have been overwhelmingly positive. I think Tim actually received maybe one of our few sort of negative responses, which was understandable. And but yeah, we've received really great feedback so far from our stakeholders, and we're grateful for that. It's certainly given us, a lot more energy to keep persevering and telling people about it. So that's us. I think the next section was to tell you a little bit about how it's going, but I do want to check in with Karina and Mishka on our time and whether or not we want to shift to questions.
Yeah, let's shift to questions. I think we had quite a few coming in, and maybe that gives you, Haley, also an opportunity to bring a little bit of information how it's going at the same time. So maybe there's a way to integrate it. We've had a high number of questions coming in via the chat, so I really appreciate the engagement that is taking place on this topic. I'm looking at some of them. I think they have been addressed by Tim or Haley. One of them was related to how to handle legal holidays within that's a 4-day work week then become a 3-day work week, and I think Tim addressed it. So if we're good with not going there, there is one specific one that I think is coming forward, and it has also come in via like emails and texts at the same time. How could this work in a 24-hour operation without an increase in funding? And so I've heard the same question from a high number of ones that are maybe dependent on public or funding at the federal or provincial level. They're offering services 24 hours a week. They don't know how to make it work, and they're finding the same pressure points as most other employees and organizations. I'm not sure if Tim or Haley would like to take this one. Haley, you want to? Or
I think, Tim, am I okay to take it?
Of course.
We're trying to use the visual sort of communication here to
Yes.
figure this out. But I think this is one that I think we need to be respectful of the fact that these are very unique challenges, and this is not one that we as an organization have figured out. And so we don't want to claim that. We don't want to give false assurances. I did have a shelter in Hamilton reach out with this very question, and what I encouraged her to do was to reach out to other shelters that had already sort of faced this challenge, and we were able to find one through some research. And so I'm not quite sure how she addressed it or what she's discovered through that. Also reaching out to consultants, to experts like 40 Week Global. What I understand is they're able to structure unique approaches to that for the organization. And the one thought I do have about it is sort of the redeployment of labor. If you're able to find efficiencies with other workers on the team, or maybe even just to streamline some of the processes, maybe there's an opportunity to redeploy your staff to ensure that kind of coverage without having to increase net pay. But again, I do think this is a really challenging one, and I think we'll be part of this movement sort of evolution to see how we can address that. Tim, would you add anything?
No, I don't think so. I think you answered that.
And I think it leads to the same question, because I think we have quite a few people who are in attendance here and people who will watch it following the recording too. Industries and sectors where it would work better for, where it's easier to integrate it than others. And I think the ones that I always hear from that are more challenging is manufacturing, because it's a challenge. Retail, restaurants, all those kind of areas, it seems a bit more challenging. Other sectors where it's easier and more difficult. Tim?
Yeah.
Or Haley?
Yeah, none. I mean, we can imagine. I mean, even in knowledge work fields, you can see a possibility. Even like in strictly office-based organizations, you could see that there could be real trouble, especially with, say, in the tech sector, when you're offering like consistent service on 24/7 basis. I mean, it's conceivable that anywhere could struggle with this aspect of things. And I think everyone has this. That every organization is different. Everyone's going to have a different solution. I do think that in terms of I do think that there's an important advocacy role in just undertaking the 4-day work week. If you want to see a change in the length and of the work week, I think there is an important way that it kind of normalizes the prospect of it in a way that will make people think more about how it might apply and bring their creativity and like innovations into their own sectors about how they might appropriate this model for their own sectors. Every time I talk to somebody about the pilot we're undertaking, they it sort of widens the possibilities in terms of what they think is normalized in the professional world, and they're bringing their own viewpoints to like how they could possibly adapt it in their organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an excellent point, because other questions that have come forward too actually relate to different positions. You've already addressed the part-time position. It might have been easier if someone was close to being full-time hours to adjust it. But in some organizations heavily rely on part-time. How does it impact those positions? And the second question that has come forward too, because we have a high number of senior executives that are part of this webinar today. And it's hard to imagine. I think it's maybe really hard to imagine what it would look like, because they're likely working already 6 days a week. I'm not saying that this is the right thing to do or that is the right trend, but have you found that there is a different take dependent on the positions within organizations? So if we're looking at someone who's maybe part-time, but also someone who's maybe a senior executive who says, I'm not sure.
Well, I think that we can both speak to the senior executive side. I think we'll probably both have points about that. I know that our senior management team, several members of it did used to work on Saturdays. There is that extra period of time that you just need to put in sometimes, or maybe even every week to get ahead or to get on top of things. Our CEO, did share with us that he finds that the Fridays now are kind of like a deep work time, whereas before there would be like a ton of meetings. On some Fridays he'll spend half the day doing some work and really, getting through a ton on a Friday that has less of a meeting intense period. I think that one key thing is that you really can't control whether an employee is going to put extra work in on the weekend or flex some time from a Thursday afternoon into a Saturday morning or something like that. And you can only hope to kind of support them to bring it back to the sort of desired 4-day work week. But I don't know. I think there is a benefit to even senior executives who kind of who might use some of that Friday for work purposes. Haley, do you have anything to add to that? And anything towards the part-time aspect of things?
Well, the part-time aspect I think is really interesting, and you can imagine a number of different challenges, not least of all some part-time staff not wanting a reduction in hours, and so in that case, it's how are you going to ensure that they are benefiting, the same way that perhaps full-time staff are. And this is where our proration was really important. And I think a surprise, honestly, to a lot of folks that we prorated increased salary for our part-time folks. The CEO issue, I think, is really, really important, just given the importance of senior leadership in the success of the 4-day work week within the organization. And it was certainly a concern I had. Our CEO is dynamic and often, would share that he had no trouble with the number of hours he was working each week, that he actually, derived energy from it. And I'm sure that's a common, sort of characteristic of many senior leaders and especially entrepreneurs and what have you. We connected him with direct coaching with another CEO, and this is through one of the resources that we're sharing in our slide deck. And through that coaching, I think he realized, one, that his time wasn't being used as optimally as it could be. There was quite a bit of more senior level work that he wasn't doing just because he was so busy, and that's actually where a lot of his weekend and Friday time was going. The second thing is the importance of health and well-being to the most senior leader. Being well rested, I think, creates creativity and innovation and all the rest. And so he's really, it took him a little bit, and I think he'd be okay with us admitting it, but he's all in now. And I think our strongest advocate of the 4-day work week is incredible.
You know what, and you're making an excellent point, because I think it's the executive team within an organization has to get behind it. A lot of nonprofits and charities have to get their boards behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also a whole educational process that's slightly different than what the employees are facing. Phil is with us today, and their question is, are there any existing organizations currently practicing in Canada, and what is the data suggesting? And I think, Tim, you had kind of hinted at some of the data of some of the recent studies as well. But either one of you aware of organizations that maybe are well known to our attendees that are practicing a 4-day work week?
Yeah, I know that there are lots. Haley, you may have more names coming to mind, and we can send around articles. In the presentation, there are links to articles that sort of cover Canadian corporations and charities and nonprofits who are undertaking the 4-day work week. We have a new podcast called Let's Imagine, which has an interview with an organization based in, I think, Nova Scotia that has instituted the 4-day work week. And so we're part of just a cohort that's undertaking this work in Canada. We know that there's a lot of organizations out there trying this, and I can put an article in the chat, and also it'll be linked to in the resources page of more organizations. Haley, do any come to mind immediately for you that are sort of Canadian equivalent organizations?
They're practicing it. I'm more familiar with nonprofits that are in this space, like Greenpeace Canada, and I was just in touch with AGAL Canada, which is a 50 staff unionized workforce that are going to be embarking on a pilot as well. And I know there are a number of Canadian organizations in the North American pilot that we're participating in. I've just thrown a link into the chat, which shows some of the other companies, but also some more information on other countries that are doing this. Even at the government level, the adoption of the 4-day work week is something that's happening. So hopefully that helps.
Very good. I'm conscious that we only have about 2 minutes time, 2 minutes left here, but there's a great question that has come forward, and that is the question of absenteeism and the impact that this might have. I was wondering if one of you wanted to address that, maybe Tim?
That was the statistic that I was trying to look for earlier. Haley, do you remember it was a pretty dramatic reduction in absenteeism during the pilot periods in previous years? Haley, any inkling of remembering of that?
I cannot remember the stat either. However, I think what we can do is include, we have a link to the study in the UK that I think it did show a profound reduction in absenteeism. Our apologies for not having the stat handy though.
No, and I just wanted to also let all attendees know that we are going to email you the presentation, and part of Tim and Haley's presentation also includes a lot of links and sites that hopefully will answer some of the questions that you have. But before we finish, I want to come back to the first question that came into our chat. And the individual has says, well, if the majority of businesses are closed now, say they're all closed on a Friday, how does it impact us as a society? If we're seeing a significant change in when we maybe can access some services or purchase some products because of changes that those organizations have made. If we look 5 years down the road, how do you see it? Haley, I think, did you?
No, my glasses were sliding down, but Tim, did you want to jump in on this one, or?
I mean, I think that this just speaks to the need for different industries to have different approaches to this work. If it is to be undertaken, if it is to become normalized, then you'd want to see a staggered approach from industries that want to have full coverage of a 7-day week. So you wouldn't have this shared day when, it's Boxing Day, nationally, where nothing's open and you can't do anything. I think that would be the solution to that you wouldn't necessarily see this like dramatic closure situation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does, actually. I think it's great. We are at 11 o'clock, and I think this dialogue likely could go on for another half an hour to an hour. But I really wanted to give our personal thanks from everyone here, from our team and from our attendees, for giving us your time and insight on a topic that is so critically important to so many organizations that are looking for options and solutions to attracting and retaining the talent that they have. My thanks also go to the Niagara Region's Economic Development team for supporting this important dialogue that we had today. Again, the presentation will be emailed to everyone, and will also this particular webinar will be available on our website at gncc.ca. And on that note, thank you very much, and safe traveling to everyone today. It's a bit snowy and icy down here. Thank you.
Thank you.